It was the year 1939. Hitler ruled Germany and began to turn his attention to Poland. He started making demands on Polish territory, which the Poles firmly rejected. September 1st, the Poles were taken by surprise when 1.5 million German troops poured into Poland with the support of Joseph Stalin. Then the British government defended Poland and declared that Hitler halt the attack. When they got no response, they declared war in Germany on September 3rd. This date is acknowledged as the beginning of World War II. By September 15th, Poland was in the mercy of the Nazis. The Polish government fled to Romania. Australia soon also entered in the war, followed by Great Britain. Hitler also invaded the Soviet Union and invited Japan into the Axis partnership. Japan accepted the offer in 1940. Then came the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The United States entered the war kicking and screaming on December 8th when the war was officially declared. Robert Cambell Orman wanted to be a part of this historic event, and so in 1942 he enlisted and was sent off to boot camp. Robert was born December 23, 1924, in Spring Hill, Tennessee. He had an older brother named John who was 12 years old when he was born. Robert chose to go by the name of Bob. He had a strict childhood and attended Columbia Military, but had lots of fun times too. He loved to go fishing, hunting, and he loved to play with his black best friend. Bob was 7 when tragedy struck and his father died. This was hard on Bob, and the only possession he got from his dad were some gold coins that he treasured for years until someone broke into his home in Utah and stole them. Bob's brother John took over the role of father, and this caused some contention over the years between the brothers. Bob was a good student, and by the time he was 18, he had already attended 3 different colleges: Vanderbilt, Louisiana State, and Arkansas A&M. He played football for Vanderbilt and then for Arkansas A&M. He was in college for 1 year when he enlisted for the Army Air Force in 1942. Hitler had conquered Germany and had allied with Japan. It was then that Robert was sent off to boot camp on the east coast of the U.S. Boot camp lasted for 2 months and was very intense. A significant number of enlistees did not even make it through camp. Bob was taught all military procedures, weapons training, and prepared for war. After his training, he was sent from the United States to the Pacific island of Tinian. Right away, he had experiences with the bugs there. The mosquitoes were so pesky. They were very aggressive, and they had to put nets over themselves when they slept at night, or they would get covered with bites. There would be 12 men in one tent with 3 inches between their cots. There was no heating or air conditioning and no refrigeration or stoves. The latrine bathroom was a block and a half away from their sleeping quarters. One bomber wrote, "The toilet paper was waxy like the glossy pages of this year's catalog. Shaves and showers were always with cold water. I never heard anyone complain except about the Australian spam. We missed a lot from home. A candy bar was a huge treat." Tinian is where Bob learned to fight in combat in a B-29 called the Big Time Operator. Bob was a part of the 9th Bombardment Group, which was made up of the 1st, 5th, and 99th Squadrons. Bob learned every combat position on the plane except actually flying the plane. His main position was the tail gunner. When they flew, they carried parachutes, life jackets, and individual life rafts in case they had to bail out over water. They also had vests that contained flak jackets, helmets, pistols, cold weather clothing, and survival kits. The B-29s would carry about 6 tons of bombs on each plane. Metal straps held the bomb clusters together. The straps would break at a certain height above the ground, causing the small individual bombs to scatter over a large area. One cluster of bombs would cover half a mile wide and 1.5 miles long. The impact to the ground would cause the bombs to explode and start a large fire. When the fire was attempted to be put out with water, it caused the fire to spread. All of Robert's missions were flown over Japan. The long-distance bombing of Japan's interior had started in the fall of 1943, and Robert and his crew continued to facilitate this objective. He became an expert over time in this area and began to train other crews. Before regular combat missions of those he trained, most of the air crews flew practice missions to the uninhabited islands of the Marianas. This was for navigation and bombing practice. The saddest part was that many of the crew members he got to know and train were killed. He lost a lot of his buddies, as he called them in later years. This made him very sad. In his group, they said that their crew was a close-knit family, so everyone was honored and respected. Sergeant Jody Mann was one of Bob's friends. His plane was shot down and lost along with the rest of his crew. Sergeant Kenneth E. Logan, another good friend of Bob's, was never found. It has been assumed that they were shot down, and those who weren't killed were taken prisoner and died in the hands of their captors, and First Lieutenant William H. Summy was wounded by target. Bob did not see him again. Robert never did find out what really happened to some of his friends, but many more of his other buddies were buried at the Tinian Military Cemetery, where those who were unable to be transported home could lie. One time Bob had been fighting in battle, and the plane he was in had been hit rather hard. The plane had to make an emergency landing into the water off the island of Tinian. They swam to shore and got back to the base. Unfortunately, the B-29s were remarkably sturdy planes, and many made it back to their bases, even with one or two engines gone, with gaping holes, or half the tail blown off. Bob was always grateful when he returned home with minimal damage or just none at all. Another remarkable moment during the war was when Bob was asked to train the crew of the Enola Gay and escort the plane in the historic dropping of the atomic bomb. The Air Force only required 35 missions, but Robert ended up flying 2 more in order to escort the Enola Gay. 3 weather planes were sent out 1 hour before the Enola Gay took off. They were responsible for making sure the weather was adequate to drop the bombs. If the predetermined target was not accessible, then they had 3 other alternate targets. When it was decided that the weather was fine, the Enola Gay, along with 2 other planes, took off. The B-29 Superfortress by Chester Marshall states, 2 B-29s following the Enola Gay off the runway at Northfield would play a vital role in the mission. Robert took off in the early morning of August 6, 1945, and accompanied the plane that would drop the first atomic bomb in history, the Enola Gay. They called the bomb Little Boy. His plane watched as the Enola Gay neared its destination of Hiroshima, Japan. Then they received their signal that it was time to turn back. They made a U-turn and made their way back home to Tinian while the Enola Gay continued on its lonesome journey. 320,000 people were killed that day, nearly half the city's population. Back at Tinian, the word spread that the mission had been a success. General Farrell passed the information to General Groves and the staff at the Pentagon. When President Truman got the news, he exclaimed, "This is the greatest thing in history." Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, who flew the Enola Gay and helped to orchestrate the whole mission, wrote in his book, Flight of the Enola Gay, "We were still groping for words to describe what we had witnessed, but the spectacular consequence of a single bomb explosion was beyond our understanding. The atomic bomb changed the course of history. Robert was able to help in this endeavor and, in a very small way, contribute to the end of the war." Robert Cambell Orman was an amazing man. He helped the Allies win the Second World War. He faced fear head-on in battle and did not look back. He gave his all for his country and the freedoms that we hold dear to our hearts. He flew 37 missions before going home to Tennessee at the end of the war. His plane, the Big Time Operator, flew 46 combat missions total, and the nose of the infamous plane is displayed at the Boeing Field in Seattle, Washington today. His courage to fly 37 missions made him an individual in history whose actions shaped his legacy. He always had great respect for the men who fought alongside him. He showed a lot of emotion when talking about the war. It was a sensitive issue until the day he died of March 2000. He told very few of his experience. He was a hero to our country and to me.